Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. This is the first installment of my project to add vintage history-bounding items into my day-to-day wardrobe. I knew from the beginning that I would need to make a few tops, since they are essential. Fresh out of the cinema of the new Little Women adaptation, I wanted a Victorian-style blouse. I came across the truly Victorian Garibaldi blouse pattern and thought it was perfect. I decided to not go with a plain white blouse because I was already planning on making a few different ones for later decades. Instead, I picked this striped cotton ticken. It is still quite versatile, comfortable, and a really nice weight. I think it was £8 per metre at my local fabric shop, and I purchased 3 metres. With truly Victorian patterns, the best way for me to get them in UK is to get the digital patterns. Once downloaded, I print it out according to the instructions and taped all the pieces together, just like making a giant puzzle. I then cut out the pattern pieces. I absolutely abhor tracing patterns, and because this wasn't the usually thin pattern paper, I decided to cut out the extra pattern sizes after selecting mine. I kept these pieces and I am confident I'll be able to tape them back up if I ever need the additional sizes. I first made a mock-up for this in some leftover plain polycotton I had. The mock-up was a success. It needed very few alterations, mostly waist placement as I am very short-waisted. I cut out the extra length and made it the belted version of the blouse, which meant I could keep the mock-up. It's not my best work of course, but I think it is a nice sleeveless top for the summer and I will get a couple of uses out of it. For the actual blouse, I pre-washed and ironed my striped cotton. I then went about cutting out all the pieces, making sure guidelines, etc. were correct. The first step is to set the button plackets on the centre front in place. I found the truly Victorian instructions super easy to follow. The plackets are integrated in the pattern as seam allowance and you simply have to turn one over and one under, iron them in place and then top stitch. The pattern instructed me to do the buttonholes now, but I left it off in case I needed to make alterations further down the line. This is when I found out that the cotton was quite slippery under my machine. After this, I sew the side seams with French seams. For French seams, you sew the two wrong sides together, trim it back, and then sew again with the right sides facing each other, creating a seam within a seam. Please keep the pattern seam allowances in mind when sewing these two seams, as we will need to split the seam allowance total between the two seams. The pattern also mentions some trim you can add to the shoulder and centre front. I showed the trim and I was thinking about using in the beginning of the video, but I ended up leaving it off. For this blouse, I decided to go with the tuck-in style, so at this point I hemmed the bottom edge. I turned the raw edge under twice, 1/4 of an inch at a time, and then stitched it by machine. To finish the neckline, the pattern requires a strip of the fabric on the bias. This is pinned to the neckline, right sides together, and sewed with 1/2 inch seam allowance. It is important to clip this seam as it is curved and it will lay nicer. I then ironed the band upwards, over, and turned the seam allowance under, which was whip stitched in place by hand. Moving on to the sleeves, I sewed up the side seam together, again as French seams. I left a few inches free at the bottom of the sleeve. These were turned inwards twice, pinned and sewed by machine. This gap will help the sleeve go over my hand once it's gathered into the cuff. I sewed 2 rows of gathering stitches on the bottom of the sleeve. I set my machine to the longest stitch length. I then secure one end of the stitches in the figure of 8 around the pin. I pull on the bobbin threads and spread out the gathers until it is the same measurement as the cuff. I then pinned the cuff on, right sides together, and sewed by machine with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. had also prepped the cuff by turning one long edge under by 1/2 inch. This will be on the inside of the sleeve. Once it is sewed, it is ironed upwards and over. I pinned it in place on the wrong side and sewed it down by hand with whip stitches. To set in the sleeve, I also sewed 2 rows of gathering stitches between the notches at the top of the sleeve. I then slotted it into the armhole and pinned the shoulder marks on the side seam. I then pulled on the bobbin thread and distributed the gathers until it fit into the armhole. I basted them together and then sewed it by machine. To finish this seam, I encased it in lace tape, sewn down by machine. It was time for buttonholes. I really struggled with this. My machine kept messing up, so there is one cuff and the first buttonhole on the blouse that look a mess, and it makes me sad. But there's nothing to be done about it. Once they were all sewn, I covered them in frayed check. Once that was dry, I slashed the buttonholes, first with my seam ripper, then with embroidery scissors to the corners. I picked small plain white buttons, which I sewed on with a flower stitch that I learned from the Singer's sewing book. And that was that. Overall, I'm really happy. I love the off-the-shoulder sleeve particularly. However, because I didn't do a mock-up, the sleeves are actually several inches too long for my arms. I cannot be bothered to undo the pretty little cuffs, so they will remain a bit balloony. Oh well. I'm very excited to wear it. I've got a few more blouses coming up, so stay tuned, and thank you for watching.